Welcome everyone to this lecture on the future of artificial neural networks. Today we'll hopefully delve into the framework proposed by Wang and Fan, paper 2025, focusing on two deeply technical approaches or paradigms. First, the expansion of network or neural network dimensionality, as well as the incorporation and the involvement of dynamic feedback mechanisms. Especially with the recent Nobel Prize awarded to Hinton and Hopfield for their amazing contributions to neural systems, I think it's a very suitable time right now to explore how such foundational insights in energy-based physics, as well as energy-based memory and learning dynamics, might guide the future of artificial neural networks. I am Jihad Yassin from the School of Medicine, the University of Jordan. We might start this lecture. Transformer architectures are very well known in the field of artificial intelligence, and they've had their massive success most prominently with the GPT models that we know. However, transformers are reaching now the empirical and maybe the theoretical scaling limits, the same way computation is reaching its scaling limits due to the physical size of transistors. Technically, transformers depend heavily on massive datasets, and in the case of low data regimes or the sparsity of data, sometimes transformers may be inefficient. So what takes place here is that Wang and Fan suggest extending beyond the self-attention mechanisms by introducing some kind of intra-layer connectivity or a height dimension, as well as introducing some time-dependent feedback loops and mechanisms. These added topological and temporal augmentations they have the ability to encode some complex nonlinear dependencies and some complex nonlinear relationships within the system and enable some phase transitions like what is happening in biological cognitive systems. So now we are talking about dimensionality. We are adding a new dimension to neural networks. As you may know, neural networks are a stack of layers. Each layer usually talks only to the ones before and after. This is the 2D architecture of artificial neural networks. We have, for example, a width dimension signifying how many neurons are present per layer, and we have a depth dimension signifying how many layers exist within this multi-layer perceptron or artificial neural network. However, Wang and Fan propose adding a third dimension, which is basically height. Connections suddenly aren't vertical anymore, but we have also lateral connections. In addition to the vertical connections, we have also lateral connections within each layer. As you can see here, these are called the intra-layer links. So we have connections between nodes within the same layer. And why is this important? Well, we have three aspects. First of all, it breaks the symmetry within the network. It resists some linear unrolling, and it is more efficient. And what I mean by breaking symmetry, like in traditional layers, neurons are treated equally and independently. But with this height dimension, some neurons are allowed directly to influence others within the same layer, introducing some organizational differences. So this increases the richness in learning and the diversity of patterns within this learning system. In addition, this kind of added dimensionality promotes resistance to linear unrolling, as we might say. In simpler networks, we can usually flatten these 2D structures easily when analyzing or computing. However, with height and intra-layer links, you can't just unroll it. It's more tangled. It's more topologically complex, maybe like a knot, for example, a topological knot. So these are known as maybe topological constraints, which can improve learning stability as well as robustness within the network itself. Adding dimensionality or adding the high dimension increases the efficiency of the artificial neural networks. Instead of adding more layers per, or for example, increasing the depth of the network or increasing the width of the single layers, which increase memory and computation, we can add height to achieve similar learning power, however, with fewer parameters. So we are increasing the efficiency of the network with reduced computational complexity. So, for example, a tall network, it can match the performance of a much larger network in terms of the expressivity with using some polynomial computational complexity instead of exponential growth in computational complexity in this learning system. And we can imagine a biological parallel, actually, which is the human brain. The human brain doesn't just pass signals in one direction. It's densely interconnected in the 3D space. So you can imagine a brain organoid. Height in neural networks mimics this idea by allowing some dense local communications between units inside each single layer, more like how real neurons actually interact and communicate. So yeah, in short, you can say height makes networks smarter, more efficient, more robust, without making them unnecessarily bigger. So yeah, as you can see here, a brain-like structure, we have the width, depth, and height. Right now for the 3D neural network design, the height allows complexity within layers without necessarily adding the depth or increasing the width, and thus improving the performance with fewer parameters and computational And so the idea of high dimensionality, it powers some techniques actually. For example, looking at kernel methods like support vector machines or SVM method using kernel tricks, deep learning embeddings, transformers where attention layers operate in large vector spaces. While we might live in a 3D world, AI usually works in a world of hundreds or even thousands of dimensions. More dimensions provide more flexibility to find structure, to separate patterns, and sometimes to generalize well. However, this is not always the case. We have some arguments such as the Occam's razor argument, uh, mentioning that maybe simpler models generalize better, and this is the problem of overfitting in artificial intelligence. And some papers state that in deep learning model, the dimensionality doesn't have this much of an effect on the this much of a negative effect on high dimensionality. It doesn't have this much of like a negative effect on the generalizability uh, of the AI models used. And I have attached some papers in the description that you can check out. Anyways, high dimensional spaces um, aren't really scary in AI. They are what actually allow AI to see structure where we only see like some kind of noise or randomness. Um, in addition to kernel method function like SVMs where data is mapped into a higher dimensional space to become linearly separable, we can look at some examples like, for example, the mean field theory that authors have discussed, where individual randomness is averaged out due to many interactions within the system, like, for example, predicting gas behavior without tracking every single molecule, and maybe the behavior of a single molecule is defined by the states of the molecule surrounding. So mean field theory definitely benefits from the high dimensionality in a complex system. When we look, for example, at manifold learning and, for example, topology, complex data shapes are understood by unfolding them in higher dimensions. Yeah, so Wang and Fang have took a step further actually, and it was a very nice step, which is the idea of hyper networks. Um, These networks don't solve a task directly. Instead, they generate or optimize other networks. So you can think of it like having for example, an architect, a network architect designing the actual model for the task. And they compare this, or they present this analogy with, for example, biology, where a genotype, we have the genotype, which is the genes that we have. A genotype usually encodes the phenotype, which is how we develop and how we look like. A small amount of genetic information usually creates a very complex organism. Similarly, you can imagine a very compact hypernetwork, which can define a much larger task-specific neural model, which is the phenotype. Okay, now we can explore a very interesting topic actually, which is the Hopfield networks. We can explore how Hopfield networks give us a window or a framework into how memory, learning, and even cognition might emerge from some dynamic feedback mechanisms. A Hopfield network is a type of maybe a recurrent neural network where all neurons are connected to each other. The connections are symmetric, meaning that influence from neuron A to B is the same as from, for example, neuron B to A. The network updates its state iteratively until it reaches some kind of stability or a minima, as we might say. What is fascinating is how this behavior can be interpreted as motion through an energy landscape. So it's an energy physics inspired model. Each configuration of a neuron, of neuron activations, has a certain energy value, and this Hopfield network evolves and changes to minimize this energy state. So it's just like, for example, a ball rolling downhill until it settles at the bottom of the valley. These valleys or local minima correspond to stored memories. So these states, they correspond to memories. Even if you start from a noisy or an incomplete state, the system can converge into the correct memory. So this is known as, or this phenomenon is known as associative memory, over which the whole idea of Hopfield network is built. We have another idea which is known as phase transitions, phase transition, which was proposed in their paper. Here is where it gets even like more interesting, in my opinion. The behavior of a Hopfield network closely resemble phase transition in physics. You know, like we have different phases or different states of matter, and sometimes we could have transitions between these phases. So it is a sharp, a qualitative change in system state when a continuous parameter, for example, temperature or pressure, crosses a threshold. So we have a change in some qualitative features in the system we are studying. So it could be a physical system of matter. So for example, water becoming ice, a magnet losing its magnetism due to temperature changes, and so on. In a Hopfield network, we have similar state changes or state shifts that happen when you change inputs or weights, actually. Suddenly, the network settles into a new state, into a new pattern, like remembering a new concept or making a new decision. These changes aren't just like comparative analogies. No, they are mathematically and dynamically similar to physical state or physical phase transitions. So they can be studied within similar mathematical framework. We have a concept known as the Freston's free energy principle, which is a unifying theory when it comes to this subject. Neuroscientist Carl Freston proposed something known as the free energy principle to explain how the brain functions. The idea is that intelligent systems, biological cognitive systems, they try to minimize surprise, they try to minimize entropy, they try to minimize uncertainty in a changing environment of inputs. They do this by forming some internal generative constructs or internal generative models that predict what they will actually experience. The free energy term in this context is bound basically on the difference between the model's prediction and what is taking place in maybe actual reality or the perceived reality. Minimizing this free energy corresponds to learning, corresponds to new memories, corresponds to decision, becoming less surprised, learning, becoming less surprised, becoming more intelligent, and becoming more cognitively certain, as we might say. Now we can connect that back, the Freston's free energy principle, to the Hopfield dynamic. Basically, the network transitions from high entropy, many possible states, very high uncertainty, high cognitive surprise, to a low entropy stable state. This is exactly what the brain does. It resolves uncertainty into low entropy clarity. In that sense, a phase transition in a neural network is like phase transition. It is a moment of learning. It is a moment of insight in biological cognitive systems. So yeah, we can sum this up. Hopfield networks, they create memory by evolving through an energy landscape. Their dynamics mirror phase transitions with some, for example, abrupt system-wide changes in the state. And we have the Freston's theory that provides the cognitive interpretation, where learning is a shift from uncertainty to internal coherence, just like a physical system settling into some kind of low entropy order. Okay, now so we can have our attention on loops and generative models. Modern generative models, like for example diffusion models, which exemplify a dynamic feedback based process in artificial intelligence. They are not just powerful generative tools, or for example powerful AI tools to be used in generating image. They also give insight. These diffusion models, they provide insight, and they are also blueprints for how memory and reasoning may emerge in these artificially intelligent systems. So what are diffusion models? At their core, diffusion models work in like two stages. We have the noising stage and we have the denoising stage. The forward process, which is the corruption process, it starts with some clean data like an image or text, and they gradually add noise step by step until the data becomes almost inseparable and indistinguishable from random noise. And we have for sure the denoising process, or the reconstructive process, or the reverse process, where the model learns to remove that noise, reversing the steps and reconstructing original data from this kind of randomness. This is not just a smart idea, it is or a smart trick. It is actually a closed feedback loop. So we are having here some kind of a feedback loop where the models learns to navigate both direction. We have the destruction and we have recovery, and this loop allows it to learn and generalize and adapt well and generate new data samples with high fidelity and accuracy. From a mathematical standpoint, these diffusion models, or this entire process, as we might say, is grounded in the field of stochastic differential equations or stochastic processes. These equations model systems that evolve over time under both deterministic rules as well as random noise, much like biological systems or physical systems in thermodynamics, or for example quantitative finance. Solving these stochastic differential equations ensures that the model's behavior is stable with some well-defined solutions. Even when some kind of randomness is involved, we can work out the trajectories involved. This makes diffusion models mathematically robust, mathematically sound, and even empirically robust. So Wang and Fan in their paper, they interpret these bidirectional dynamics as more than just like statistical tricks. They see them as models of cognition or cognitive reasoning. The forward corruptive process stimulates some kind of forgetting or degradation, fading memory. The backward reconstructive process stimulates recall, rebuilding structure from fragments. Together, we have a full temporal loop, much like our brains, where the ideas are continuously and iteratively refined, revisited, and reconstructed. We have constant and continuous looped reconstruction of thoughts. So this allows not just a chain of thought or a tree of thought paradigm. We have a loop of thought paradigm of continuous refinement. This looping behavior enables something that the feed-forward only models can't do, which is temporal coherence. Information is consistent across the time steps, as well as it enables some memory like dynamics. The model returns context across these multiple passes. So we can see here an example of a diffusion model. And we're looking at these networks with such feedback loops. How we can differentiate them, for example, from graph neural networks. So we're looking, for example, at the graph neural networks. We just have some information passing from nodes through the edges. However, we are not having a structural dynamic change within the network itself, like what is happening here. So there is actually a difference in the essence itself. Feed-forward networks process information once. We have like a single pass of processing, but we're looking at real cognition. Real cognition is not a single, it's not about having a single pass, it is about iteration. We reconsider, we revise, we converge on ideas. So yeah, the future models embody this kind of dynamics and recursive nature. We can think further of neural networks, neural network thinking with some powerful ideas from physics, actually, and very interesting ideas, which is the idea of topological phase transition. Wang and Fan in their paper proposed that these could serve as the foundation for higher order cognitive function and higher order cognitive properties that might emerge in future AI systems. Beyond the conventional dynamics, most neural networks evolve by adjusting, like we know that most neural networks, the feed-forward artificial neural networks, they evolve by adjusting some kind of numerical values, adjusting weights, maybe learnable activation functions, loss gradients, objective functions, and so on. These are metric-based changes. They depend on distances, magnitudes, directions in numerical spaces. But when discussing the idea of a topological phase transition, we have a quite different, it is quite different. They involve some non-metric based changes. We have full reconfigurations of the structure without relying on size or scale. We can think of them as shifts in the connectivity or the form or the shape itself, like turning, for example, a donut into a cup. For example, this is one of the classic examples in topology. No tearing, just kind of, we have just a kind of bending that is taking place. So in the neural terms, this means we change how the information flow, but we don't change how much. We don't change the amount. We change the structure, we change the way, and we change the form. So this is what is taking place in the topological phase transition idea. We have a very popular or a well-known statistical physics model known as the Ising model. And here we can see an example where physics meets computation and physics inspiring computation. Wang and Fan they took the inspiration from the Ising model in statistical physics, which basically describes particles. Spins, they can be in the up or the down state, interacting with their neighbors. For example, at certain temperature, the system undergoes a phase transition, becoming magnetized, for example. We can imagine the neuron's state in a network acting like a spin, transition between, for example, organized and disordered states, mirror some kind of cognitive shifts. Wang and Fan in their paper, instead of considering, for example, the spin of particles, we can imagine reversing or changing the direction of the gradient within the model to ensure robustness of such models. So instead, for example, of switching the spin of the particles, we can imagine switching the direction of the gradient during the optimization procedure that is taking place. In some physical systems, like for example, superconduction, superconductors, or superfluids, we observe some kind of vortex-anti-vortex pairs, tiny like squares of rotating energy. These pairs are actually topological defects. They are loops. The loops are imagined as holes in the networks. These pairs are that encode some hidden structure. So Wang and Fan actually propose a very deep and interesting analogy which relates to loops in neural networks, like for example feedback circuits. These loops, they can be seen as topological defects or topological features. When the links transform into loops, it's like a topological phase transition. This transformation is not just an update in the numerics that we have, it's a full structural shift, changing how neurons relate and organize with each other. Why do these, like example, defects or loops or cognition loops add robustness to the network? They simply allow the network to recover from missing or corrupted signals, just like how the biological brain reroutes information. They enable some kind of emergent criticality, behaviors that spontaneously arise from local interactions, such as memory formation or decision spikes. This is where simple neurons collectively exhibit intelligent group behavior, it is a collective kind of intelligence, not by individual tuning, but by network level configurations. These mechanisms could actually transform artificial intelligence from static function approximators to some kind of adaptive models or adaptive agents that learn by evolving their internal structure. Such networks can model nonlinear dependencies, nonlinear chaotic systems, as in reservoir computing, for example, stimulate brain-like behaviors and support dynamic reconfiguration in response to uncertainty. In medicine and neuroscience, for example, this paradigm could help decode the critical dynamics of disorders or stimulate brain recovery processes. So yeah, in summary, Wang and Fan they proposed a very interesting paradigm shift from fixed layer feed-forward architectures to spatially and temporally dynamic models. Through dimensional augmentation with the addition of the high dimension and with feedback dynamics loops, neural networks can gain emergent cognitive traits like memory, adaptability, criticality, the fusion of or the incorporation of insights from physics, topology, and neuroscience is a very intelligent approach in my opinion, and I think this is the future of towards more intelligent systems or maybe artificial general intelligence.